Are you a daydreamer or a fantasist? Now, our reaction to that is to say no straight away because there's a negative connotation to those terms. But the fact is, the likelihood of us having never been a daydreamer or never fantasized is absolutely nil for two important reasons. One, we've all got a mind. And our mind has this tremendous ability to take in information from exterior sources and store it. And it just doesn't store it in a blank form. We can actually then revisit the information in our mind's eye. We can interact with the characters that maybe we've been watching on the television or reading about in books. And we can modify the scenes to suit ourselves. We've got a tremendous ability to do that. There's one reason why we would have been a daydreamer at one point or another. And the other reason, we live in a world that promotes daydreaming and fantasizing. All around us there are things designed to push us down that particular route. We've got advertising. It's designed to make us think that if we buy a particular product, we live a lovely life. And it encourages us to think about that so-called lovely life. So we desire the product. We've spoken about television, films, magazines, books. These things sometimes promote lifestyles, urging us to go down a particular route because in our daydreams we've already tasted and we've seen how good they really are. And what is it that people daydream and fantasize about? How about prominence? People do dream about that. Fame. People dream about that. Have you ever watched one of these television programs? Britain's Got Talent. When you look at it, you wonder if that's the case, don't you, sometimes? But those people, they've been up there pretending or claiming to have some great skill or ability. But what's led them to do that when quite clearly they haven't got a good voice or whatever? Isn't it because they've been daydreaming about it? And when they daydream, do they ever daydream that they're going to fail? No, they always daydream about the glory and the magnificence of it all when they become a great star. And that helps us to appreciate something about daydreamers. They never think about the possible negative consequences. The whole idea about a daydream, a fantasy, is that you push the negative out and you just focus on what you hope will come about. In fact, in the end, you can convince yourself that it will come about. And that's what leads these people to stand up there in front of a whole nation and make a complete fool of themselves because of what they've been fantasizing on. It's not just fame and prominence that people fantasize about. Many people today fantasize about immoral sexual activity. If anybody says that's not the case, well, why is there a multi-billion-dollar industry that promotes this then? It's not because it's failing, is it? It's because it's succeeding. But when people dream about such things, they never think about the painful consequences. They push those away and just think about their fantasy and what they want out of it. Well, you know, it's interesting, but the Bible indicates this is exactly what we should expect the world today to be like. Because according to the scriptures, the ruler of this system of things, Satan the devil, is a serial fantasist and daydreamer. And where will it all end up for him? Well, let's open our Bibles to Romans chapter 20 and find out. Now, we're going to read a few little passages here, and this is the end result that will come to Satan the devil, Revelation chapter 20. But after we've read it, Revelation chapter 20, verses 1 through 3, what did I say earlier? That was a little test, just to see if you were awake or not. And you know, what's disturbing is that some of you failed, but there we go. Revelation chapter 20. Here's the end result to this serial fantasist, Satan the devil. Let's read the first 3 verses initially. It says, "And I saw an angel coming down out of heaven with the key of the abyss and a great chain in his hand. And he seized the dragon, the original serpent, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years. And he hurled him into the abyss and shut it, and sealed it over him, that he might not mislead the nations any more until the 1,000 years were ended. After these things he must be let loose for a little while." Now this is the outcome to Satan in the very near future. Did you notice what's going to happen to him? He's going to be seized, and put into an abyss of total inactivity, where he won't be able to affect human beings by promoting more fantasies. Well, after that, at the end of verse 3, it says he will be let loose for a little while. This is because justice requires he be let loose, not for his own benefit, but because then he would have the opportunity of tempting those people who in the past had been ignorant of Jehovah's purpose, but during the resurrection and after they've been personally resurrected during this 1,000-year period, they would be educated to Jehovah's standards, and then they would need a final test themselves to be able to pass. Well, after they've done that, look at what then happens to Satan, as mentioned in verse 10. So this is after the 1,000 years. It says, and the devil who was misleading them was hurled into the lake of fire and sulfur. Basically, he ceases to exist forever. That's the end result that's coming to Satan. But just stop and think about it. This superhuman spirit creature at one time had a purposeful and happy existence stretching out for eternity before him. He had a meaningful relationship with Jehovah God. The scriptures indicate that he had some type of authority, although we don't know exactly what authority. But then, of course, things started to go wrong. He started to crave people to worship him. He stepped in at the beginning of human history, and he started off a human rebellion. The end result for him doing that is this. When he was daydreaming, of course, he never thought how bad it could turn out for him. He ignored the negative consequences. But could he possibly have ever thought he could replace Jehovah in the universe? It doesn't make any sense. But he must have daydreamed going down that route, thinking that he could come between Jehovah and human beings. But that's illogical. Jehovah's the only source of life. Without Jehovah, we're going to die. But Satan didn't care about the way he was going to cause suffering to others. He just daydreamed, fantasized, acted, and there's the end result for him. Interestingly, as soon as he had the opportunity, he infected human beings with that same trait of daydreaming. Remember what he said to Eve? You can be like God, knowing good and bad. That's ridiculous. How can Eve be like God? She's a human being, Jehovah's spirit creature, superhuman, way beyond our capabilities. Eve should have realized that straight away. But she liked the idea of what Satan was promoting. She listened, she daydreamed, and then she acted. And what was the end result for her? Well, unlike us, when Eve looked in a mirror and saw her body breaking down, wrinkles appearing, grey hair coming, she knew that was a direct end result of her own stupidity. She could have done something about that. It was her own fault. When her children rebelled and murdered one another, she knew that that was a direct end result, a consequence of her own action. Imagine how that must have tormented her as time went on. Yes, but where did it all start? With a daydream, fantasizing about the wrong things. We can go on and speak too about these superhuman spirit creatures who before the flood rebelled against Jehovah, the angels. What was it that they fantasized about? Immoral sexual relations with these women on the earth. But they must have stopped, surely, and thought to themselves, well, if we do this, we're going to lose out on Jehovah's favor. The end result for us will be the same as Satan. We're going to lose out on everything. But the indicators are they quickly threw that thought out of their mind, and they just thought about what they wanted to. They ignored the negative consequences, they acted, and they're in exactly the same position as Satan at this moment. They're just waiting to be abyssed for 1,000 years before their eventual destruction after that. All these things took place because people daydreamed about the wrong thing. They ceased to be realistic in their thoughts. Well, Satan is still promoting deceptive fantasies today. Remember the means he does so? Films, magazines, soap operas, game shows, you name it. It can quickly infect us with this daydreaming attitude. And what are some of the common fantasies of people today? How about this for one? Financial security. That is a daydream, a satanic illusion. Money cannot bring the sort of security that we actually need if we're going to survive out what's coming. Let's just prove that by opening our Bibles to Proverbs chapter 11. Proverbs chapter 11. I'm just going to read verse 4. But notice how really Jehovah brings human beings down to reality in just a few words. Proverbs chapter 11 and verse 4. It says, valuable things will be of no benefit on the day of security, but righteousness itself will deliver from death. Have I just given you the wrong scripture? One's are mouthing things at me. What did I just say? Oh, right. I've had a long week. You'll have to forgive. Let me start that again. Can we erase that from the tape? Everyone who listens to that forever will be there. Right. Let's read verse 4 again. Valuable things will be of no benefit on the day of fury, but righteousness itself will deliver from death. Now we know we need some money, don't we? We've got to have clothes, we've got to have a roof over our head, but Satan's will distorts that and promotes the idea that when it comes right the way down to it, you can always buy yourself out of problems. Not on the day of Jehovah's fury. Now this week we've got our material in the Watchtower. Last week we were discussing the Great Tribulation. Can you imagine anybody at that moment in time turning to an angel and trying to bribe their way out? It doesn't make any sense, does it? What do we really need? Well, it says there at the end of verse 4, we need to be righteous. And it takes time to build up a righteous standing with the Creator. That is of real value, because that will mean our life. There are going to be a lot of very wealthy people in the near future who will be looking at their bank accounts and thinking, what on earth have I done? It would have been all totally pointless. Why lose out on Jehovah's favour in this never-ending quest for more and more and more money and material things? If we go down that route, it indicates something about us. Just turn forward to Proverbs 18. This is what it indicates about us if we're constantly seeking more and more material things. Verse 11. It says, the valuable things of the rich are his strong town, and they are like a protective wall in his imagination, or we would say, in his dreams. It doesn't make any sense. Material security is satanic illusion. If we've been infected with that, maybe it indicates that we're filling our mind with the wrong thing, and we need to realign ourselves with regard to what this book tells us we should be thinking about. There's one common fantasy. How about another one? Sexual matters are frequently fantasized. Sexual fantasies. People watch these immoral films and videos, and if anybody thinks that they can turn off the television and the pictures disappear from the mind, well, again, that's foolish. You turn off the television, the pictures are still there. We can play through them in our mind. We can, of course, then put ourselves into the scene, and before long we're committing immorality between our ears. It can happen. Satan's world is designed to promote it. Of course, when we start thinking about these things, frequently we then start going down the route of just play acting them out. We can start to flirt with members of the opposite sex or even of the same sex. We can start going down a route waiting for others to respond to our flirtatious attitude. Then, of course, we start to engage in intimate conversation, perhaps with ones, and then that's only a short step to actually committing immorality. Who would not deny, or who could deny, that thinking about immoral things is frequently like a little rehearsal, a mental rehearsal for carrying them out? But even if we don't act on these things, it is still wrong. Just thinking about wrong things is bad in the eyes of the Creator. And those who indulge in fantasies, they're missing a vitally important life-saving thought. Let's turn to 1 John chapter 2 and allow the Bible to remind us of it. 1 John chapter 2. And we're going to read a few verses here. Now, these are quite hard-hitting, but we will see why as we get through the passage. 1 John chapter 2, and we're going to read verses 15 through 17. But look out as to how Jehovah inspired this man John to write about certain desires. From verse 15, he said, "Do not be loving either the world or the things in the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Because everything in the world, the desire of the flesh and the desire of the eyes and the showy display of one's means of life, does not originate with the Father, but originates with the world. Furthermore, the world is passing away, and so is its desire. But he that does the will of God remains forever." Did you notice how it speaks of desires? Is it only those who do wrong things that Jehovah's going to judge soon? Not according to that. Did you notice in verse 15, we're told not to be loving the world or the things in the world. How can we tell what we love? Well, if we daydream about things and we fantasize about them, we love them. As it says in verse 17, we've got this desire. We can tell what we desire by what we daydream and fantasize about. So if we're daydreaming and fantasizing about the wrong things, we've really got to get tough with ourselves now whilst the window of opportunity is open to us. We've got to gain control of our own mind, because we're going to be judged if we desire, we love, we daydream or fantasize on the wrong things. Now some might struggle with this thought, but actually it makes perfect sense. Let's say there's 100 people in a room, and all that 100 people, they're all daydreaming about material things, gaining more material things than they ever need, gaining real wealth at a great level. Now, in that 100 people, there might only be 50 who are clever enough to act upon that daydream, clever enough to actually turn their daydream into reality and go out and earn all that money. Would it be fair for Jehovah to only judge adversely the 50 who are clever enough to act? Does that mean a qualification to be in God's new world is to be silly and stupid and not intelligent? It doesn't make sense. Do we get the point? What about if there's 100 people in a room and they're all daydreaming about immoral sexual activity, but only 50 are good enough to actually go out and live their fantasies out? Does that mean that they're the only ones in that room that Jehovah would judge adversely? That would mean that Jehovah would have a more favourable view of people who are not good looking. It doesn't make sense. Do we get the idea? What we are and what we would like to be if our circumstances permitted it, that's what we're going to be judged upon. So that's why we've got to get to grips with what's going on between our ears, remember. Daydreaming and fantasizing about wrong things is as good as, or as bad as, doing them. So we've really got to get this wall between our ears under grips. Now, of course, we might be thinking to ourselves, well, I don't daydream and fantasize about these immoral things or extremely bad things. Sometimes we might like to sit down and spend a lot of time maybe visualizing vacations in lovely places, that sort of a thing. We might think, what's the matter with that? Well, within reason, it's nice to sit down and think about the way the earth is and go into nice places. But imagine if we were sitting down and spending an enormous amount of time doing that. How would the Creator feel about it? It's very interesting. The word desire there has sparked a lot of comment from various Bible dictionaries because it's a very interesting word. One said that these desires are not necessarily immoral or base. They may be refined in character, but they are evil if inconsistent with the will of God. So yes, we want to have time when we're mentally relaxing, but if we're wasting hour after hour after hour daydreaming about things when we should be doing things for the Creator, that's a problem. We've got to get to grips with that too. So do we see how we've got to be very careful that we don't allow our mind to run away with us? We've got to control it. We've got to make conscious decisions about it. And yet, if you go right the way back to the beginning of our discourse, we said that we've just got this mind that can visualize things. How can we harness that ability in a positive way? Well, rather than dreaming about worldly fantasies, we should be using our mind's eye, as it were, to visualize kingdom realities. Now, the kingdom spoken about in the Bible is a real government. The scriptures tell us how many people make that government up. 144,001. The Bible tells us the manifesto of that kingdom government. Of course, when Jesus, the king of the kingdom, was actually on the earth, he was a real person just like us. He walked on this earth, and people just like ourselves, they spoke to him. Did you know that the gospel accounts are written out in such a way that if we put them into our mind and we visualize them, it's almost as if we are walking along with Jesus Christ? Now that helps us to see how real the kingdom is, walking alongside our King. But that takes mental effort. It doesn't come easily. We've got to read, meditate, visualize. That makes it real. Of course, some would struggle with the idea because in their mind the kingdom is just some abstract thing. But it's not. There are kingdom realities that can be seen on this planet right now. Let's just open our Bibles and remind ourselves of some. Matthew chapter 24, famously. And take a look at what it says in verse 14. And let's ask ourselves, has this become a reality? Matthew 24, verse 14. It says, "And this good news of the kingdom will be preached in all the inhabited earth, for a witness to all the nations, and then the end will come." Part of the sign of the last days. Has it become real? Yes. In excess of 236 lands around the globe, this kingdom government has over 7 million loyal subjects who last year spent more than 1.5 billion hours speaking about this kingdom government. That's probably more time spent promoting this government than any other government on the earth. It's a reality. Nobody can deny it. And what about the reasoning or the support mechanism behind that? You see, unlike human governments who take from the taxpayer and then use that to promote themselves, this kingdom government hasn't done it. How can it afford to spend all this money distributing without any charge to members of the public the Bible and other superbly put together Bible literature? It's absolutely marvellous. If anybody thinks, well, what's the quality of the literature, just come down and have a look at our desk afterwards. If anybody would like one, they can have a free publication or publication without charge. Do you know, I wish I'd gone to sleep earlier this week. My mind's all over the place. A publication without charge, whereby they can see the quality of the material that this kingdom produces. But how does it do it? Well, just turn back to the 29th Psalm, and we can see what is the support behind this kingdom government. 29th Psalm and verse 11. It says there, Jehovah himself will give strength indeed to his people. Jehovah himself will bless his people with peace. How on earth could this kingdom proclamation take place on the scale that it is without Jehovah God's support? It's a modern day miracle. No one can deny it. We can see it with our own eyes. A good question for us to consider, though, is are we personally involved in it? If the kingdom is real to us, we will be. We will qualify to take out this message, and then we'll do everything we can to give it out to others. We'll proclaim the established kingdom of God to our neighbours. And other people will then respond to that message and themselves take on this commission to preach. But where does it all start? What is it, the first link to actually moving us to go out in the Christian ministry? We've got to make the kingdom real between our ears. Jehovah's given us all the information we need, but do we spend time meditating on it, visualizing it, and then acting in harmony with it? If we do, we're in store for the blessings that Jehovah is going to give via the kingdom. You see, we've considered the fact that we've got this mind, and we've got the world promoting wrong things, and the Creator via the Scriptures is promoting right things. We've got worldly fantasies, kingdom realities. But the difficulty is we're actually inclined, because of our imperfection, to go down the wrong route. It is a real battle to get to grips with our minds and turn them to focus on what is good and fitting in God's eyes. Nobody just cruises through this process. In fact, our leader, Jesus Christ, he gave a little metaphor once that highlights the amount of effort that we've got to put into this equation if we're going to be amongst those who benefit from the kingdom. Just in conclusion, let's turn to Matthew chapter 11 and find out what Jesus actually said. Now, I was going to read this, if I may, initially from the King James Version of the Bible, just to confuse everyone, because this is so confusing in this Bible. Now, what do you think this means? I haven't given you the verse yet, but Matthew chapter 11, what do you think this means? This is what the King James Version states. It says, "And from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of heaven suffereth violence, and the violent take it by force." It makes it sound as if violent people have conquered God's kingdom. But is that really what Jesus said? Well, let's go to the New World Translation and get a clearer understanding. Matthew chapter 11. Let's read verse 12. Jesus said, "But from the days of John the Baptist until now, the kingdom of the heavens is the goal toward which men press, and those pressing forward are seizing it." It's an interesting mental picture that Jesus was painting, and we've got to grasp it if we're going to benefit from the lesson. You see, in ancient times, if you wanted to conquer a walled city, you didn't just walk up and knock on the door and say, "Would you let me in, please?" Because they would say no and pour something hot on you. The amount of effort you had to put in was tremendous. There would have been obstacles in your way. There would have been things being thrown at you, shot at you. You had to have your wits about you. You had to plan out your course. You had to have some flexibility. But you had to put in an enormous amount of effort, and you couldn't give in. And eventually you would get over the walls and conquer the city. Well, we don't conquer God's kingdom. But it does require that amount of effort if we're going to be beneficiaries of it. In the last few years, last few decades, anointed Christians have been expending themselves considerably to become a part of this kingdom class. Well, their example is one that we need to follow. We, most of us here, have the hope of living underneath this kingdom rule. But it's not just a matter of not doing bad. It's a matter of making sure we live up to the standards that Creator has given to us. That's not just externally, that's also internally. We've got to fight, put in effort, to reject what Satan promotes, what he's trying to infect our mind with. So if our mind starts going down the wrong route, we've got to get tough with it and drag it back and make it pursue kingdom realities. If we do so, we're going to get Jehovah's blessing. But it does require constant effort. Those who engage in worldly fantasies are soon going to face the stark reality of God's kingdom. There is a judgment moment coming for us all. So let's keep telling ourselves, worldly fantasies are displeasing to Jehovah and can only do us lasting harm. Rather, let's keep our minds and hearts focused on kingdom realities. Then we personally will enjoy its blessings soon.